Welcome to the Humans Against Poor Scholarship Summer Grant Interviews. Each one of our interviewees is competing for a $2,000 grant to help fund their summer research. Do you want to have a say in who gets funded? Become a HAPS donor today by visiting www.hapsfund.com/donate. Hello everybody and welcome to Digital Hammurabi. We have the final interviews for our HAPS scholarship today and we have our very first applicant. Hello, thank you so much for joining us. Could you just take a minute and explain where you're studying and who you are? I have never met him, but he is, if you are in the field of Assyriology, it is a name you know. So I'm glad that he's a supportive supervisor for you. That's always very important for PhD programs. So how did you get into the field? How about both? Oh no, you can take your time. It's okay.
Certainly because of these people had a sense of humanity that was very, I felt it as like something that they are able to give us something that we lack.
Mhm.
And so more and more I studied this and till I also had a great interest for history of science. And at the end, after many vicissitudes, this combined in the idea of studying Assyriology and especially cuneiform astronomy. And I still keep a general eye on antiquity. It's not just that you specially study something that you don't care about other parts of this enormous field.
Enormous is definitely the word for it. What are your own personal research interests then?
Okay, so my what I'm trying to study is, I will use a not very precise word, but the link or maybe you can say the intellectual sources of what is called mathematical astronomy that was developed among cuneiform scholars, and that is maybe our first trace of the use of a deep use of mathematics in astronomy. And because it's not easy to describe it, it's not even what I'm doing is in some way, it can sound very simple, but it's quite disturbing, because the idea was to understand how did these people think of using mathematics in understanding what occurs in the heavens, and it supposes that what we are doing in some way in mathematics is not so independent of our general thoughts. And in some way, we are used to think that mathematics is just a kind of objective field that is developed by itself. And what I begin to think, and what I'm trying to show in my dissertation, is that, in fact, these mathematics, the mathematics of cuneiform astronomy, developed in relation with a very, very strong background. And as an example, I wanted to talk about, for instance, an expression that we find in the first in the Neo-Assyrian reports, and that is they use the traditional expression, the horns of the moon, that describe how sharp the first crescent that you see is. And they use this expression also about the phenomenon that you can see in the middle of the month, where you see on one side the moon and on the other side the sun. And it's exceptional that you can see this relation between sun and moon, you can see it directly. And they also use the same expression. They say it's carni in a carni, horn on horn. And this expression, it has a strong symbolic background. I think it is, in one way, the horns is always what expresses the relation of the human to the divine in a very long tradition that is going from old Mesopotamian antiquity, and that you still find in the Quran, for instance, and also in the expression, the Hebrew expression Kernei HaShemesh, the rays of the sun, things like this. And so it has still a very strong symbolic background, but it's also the inspiration, the first inspiration of the mathematical study of what's occurring between moon and sun. And for instance, this it suggests a symmetry that that was basis of a very, very simple but very powerful mathematical analysis that shows, for instance, that what you see in the sky at one moment in the beginning of the month corresponds to what you would see in another moment, not in the same month, but in another moment in the exact middle of the month. And also, for instance, the symmetry that you want to see in the middle of the month, you will begin to ask questions about why do we see it, why don't we see it, and at other moments. And these things were more and more computed. And so this I'm trying to see how this computation that just seem numbers, in fact, they are not only numbers, but they translate something that is also thought in a deep symbolic manner. So trying to reconciliate in some way two fields that are generally thought to be separated, the scientific one and the symbolic one.
That's fascinating. Thank you very much. And what are your plans for the summer then, and how can HAPS funding help you?
Okay. In fact, my plan is very simple. I wanted to go to Europe, hopefully Berlin and Paris and maybe London, especially to meet people I wanted to work on a difficult text with maybe the only person that can read it really in the world, with Matthieu Sandriver, within Berlin, and also talk about some subjects with people in France, with Jean-Jacques Glasner, and hopefully also with Christopher Walker in London. And I also have a project that from years I try to develop, that is to see how a blind student like me could access directly, not only by from outside, to cuneiform script. So I wanted to also to see what European museums can provide to me, and I have also contacts with artists in Paris that are ready to help about trying to develop 3D cuneiform reproduction that could help me. In fact, in my research, I really emphasized the importance of the cuneiform way of writing, and I would be very just, it would become for me very concrete. For instance, if I could just touch one of these tablets that are thinking about all the time, and just to have them concretely in my hands.
One of the things that I feel often gets overlooked with cuneiform is the physicality of the objects, and I assume that for a blind student reading cuneiform, the physicality is the most important thing. So being able to touch and hold them is absolutely crucial for your research.
Yeah, we tried to do it a little here in Jerusalem with Uri Gabay, and I think what we did, the feeling I had with my hands with this small number of tablets that we have really changed my perception of the way these people are thinking, because you think also with your hands and with your eyes, and that's also what I'm trying to show. And yes, I think part of maybe the good things I discovered in my research are related to this peculiar experience of feeling the cuneiform. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. We have one audience question before I let you go.
Okay.
Did the Babylonians believe that the planets were in orbit around the sun or the earth, or just that they moved against a background of stars?
Okay. I don't have a definite answer. I mean, if they generally don't talk directly about these questions, and what they are interested in is directly the impression of what they see in the sky do on them. So in some way, it's Earth-based astronomy. But about the question of what is going on, I think for them, Earth is an important reference because it's where your eye is. It's from where you're seeing, and their astronomy is very centered on what their eyes see. But the problem was not maybe raised like this, but there is no direct nothing that would be problematic maybe for them to see the things in one or another direction. And I was struck by the fact that you find in Kepler a relation between the sun's highest and lowest velocity that is exactly what you find in Mesopotamian texts. And they may have been, some subterranean, I don't know, transmission or something that there are people who tried. I don't know how much this, I never studied this in details, but I think Van der Verden tried to find ancient traces of heliocentric patterns, and I strongly believe that if people were asked about it, they would discuss about it. And they, yes, it was a possibility certainly that they could think of.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you for taking the time to come and talk to us. It's been fascinating to hear about your research.
Okay, thank you for hearing me, for listening to me.
Of course. I'll be in touch in a couple of weeks. And I wish you all the best.
Okay. Bye-bye, Megan. Bye-bye to all.
Bye. Okay. Let me just move my screens around. Excellent. I love astronomy. I don't understand it, and I don't know enough about it, but it's always very interesting to hear other people talk about it, especially other people who know more than me, which, as I've said, is a lot of people know more about astronomy than me. We are going to take a break. We had a slight scheduling mishap, which does unfortunately happen when you're scheduling across 5 different time zones. So we will be back with our next interviewee at... I should have this all ready to go, shouldn't I? Let me see. Next schedule. We will have our next person joining us at 9:40. That is 9:40 EST. So you have, 20 minutes. Go make a cup of tea. I'm going to make a cup of tea. Play with your cat. Throw something for the dog. Have fun. We will be back right here in 20 minutes. Hello again, everybody. We are back with our next HAPS applicant, so let's get going. Hi, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, no, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's really appreciated.
Of course. Could you introduce yourself and tell us where you're studying?
So I'm Jack Neighbour, and I'm studying a PhD at the University of Cardiff under Professor Lloyd Llewellyn-Jones.
Wonderful. Sorry, so how did you get into your field?
Last year I did a master's in Assyriology at Leiden University. So my background is more or less in Sumer-Akkadian studies, but in the past I kind of like dabbled in Achaemenid studies, and then I found myself here. And after looking at different PhD opportunities and what I should take, how I should take my research further, decided that Achaemenid studies was the route for me to take.
Excellent, thank you. And for those who aren't familiar, exactly what is that study?
So Achaemenid studies looks at the Achaemenid period in what we would identify as modern-day Iran, but more specifically Fars province. So that's the most southwestern province in modern-day Iran. And that took place between around mid-6th century to the mid-late 4th century, when Alexander conquered that area, that region. And it starts with Darius I, who comes to power in the time specified, and then it ends with Darius III. But that's my period I'm focusing on. It's a period of immense change as well, because obviously the Achaemenids, and more specifically the Persians, weren't natives to the region. So you're looking at a lot of like linguistic changes, a lot of iconographic changes and cultural changes, but also a lot of stuff is borrowed from the pre-existing cultures of the Middle East. So yeah, it's a brilliant period. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And within that, what is your particular area of interest?
My particular area of interest is the study of the Achaemenid body. So anything to do from
Yeah, don't worry.
Anything to do with gesture, from language to bodily concepts. And I break it down in my PhD as specific areas across the body and institutions. And sorry.
No, I was just going to ask, are you working primarily with texts or images or a bit of both?
So that's a thing. So the language the Achaemenids were spoken in is Old Persian, but it's quite limited. There's about around 800 attested words. Probably by the time we finish this interview, we'd have used way over that. So you do have to rely on iconographic evidence, but of course you can't read that without reading textual evidence as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to work they have to work in synchronization, if that makes sense.
It does, thank you. What are your plans for the summer then, and how can HAPS help you?
So over the summer, I'm obviously going to continue with my research for my PhD, but I've been I found my way into a new project, which is essentially creating a Old Persian lexicon, which puts down all the inscriptions in cuneiform. Then you have transliteration, then you have normalization, and then the English translation. And it'll be my job to format that. And I'm working under Rash Zaini, who is an Achaemenid scholar, and he's going to be working with me on most of the translations, because of course we're basing it predominantly off the work of Rudolf Schmidt, who is probably is the leading figure in Achaemenid translations. But his last published work on this kind of topic was 20 odd years ago. So if we do find space to adapt and improvise, we of course will. Mm-hmm. But this is something we've lacked in Achaemenid studies for a while now. In Sumer-Akkadian studies, it's quite easy to find translations and information, because there's such an abundance of textual sources as well. So, but in the Achaemenid studies, we don't really have that. Just because there's not much evidence, but because it's just a smaller field in general. Mm-hmm. And what tends to happen with Achaemenid studies, it tends to get absorbed by the wider corpus of Sumer-Akkadian studies, which is a problem in itself. But this is not speaking down at Sumer-Akkadian studies. It's where my background is, and it's a wonderful subject. But it would be really nice to see us create this, I will use this word lightly, but like this canonical text for anyone who wants to study the Achaemenid period in more depth. And we're talking from all different ranges of ability. So people who have been introduced to Achaemenid studies, and people who are just wanting to do some translation work and like grammatical analysis.
That sounds valuable.
Sorry.
That sounds very valuable.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope it will be. But of course, it's not just going to be translation work. It's going to be grammatical notes as well. It's going to have images, and it's also going to place the text in the wider context of the inscriptions themselves. So you're not just going to see a text, you're going to see what the images are next to it. You're going to see the geographical location, because of course that's really important for reading these texts as well. It goes back to my own research, where I was saying previously, you have to acknowledge the bodies that sit next to these texts, as well as the actual text itself.
No, that sounds fantastic. Will this be available online, or is it going to be a print thing?
So the idea is both, but as it's very much in its infancy at the moment. And it's being commissioned by the British Institute for Persian Studies, and they're just asking that we can complete it first and then take it from there and see what happens. But the very purpose of it is that it's meant to be accessible, and then of course widen participation within Achaemenid studies as well. So the aim is to make it, free and accessible online.
So everyone can see it. That's fantastic.
Of course,
so when we're talking about the textual evidence, then that you're working with, both your PhD and for the side project, are these primarily royal inscriptions, or do you have personal domestic documents?
Old Persian is, it's almost explicitly a language of royal commission, if that makes sense. The language of the empire didn't really change too much when the Achaemenids took over. You just end up finding these Achaemenid royal inscriptions in Old Persian, but they're also trilingual, of course. So you have Old Persian, Akkadian, and Elamite. And Elamite, I know traditionally wasn't used before the Achaemenids in these massive inscriptions, but it finds its way here because, of course, Fars province, the area in which the Achaemenids find themselves, or traveled to and set up, was Elam. So they take on a lot of cultural performances and just general iconographic traditions and textual traditions from those people as well. So, but Old Persian never finds its way out of royal inscriptions per se. It finds its way into like legal documents in other languages, and occasionally you'll find an Old Persian word lying around, but it doesn't. The Persians never replace the Akkadian or Elamite. It kind of just like works its way into those languages. So you end up finding. So for one example, is traditionally the word for tax in Akkadian is mandatu, but you end up seeing it appear as bar, which is the Persian word for just meaning carried. Of course, it's little things like that. And then you go to Armenian documents in the 1st century AD, and you see words like dashan, which means literally right hand, and that's used to denote a formal agreement or a treaty, so from a handshake. But this is kind of how it permeates into other cultures. But it is more or less exclusively a royal language.
No, that's very interesting. Thank you. So what kinds of information can you get from these texts about the Achaemenid body? So,
as I was saying before, from the Armenian text, you can see that they understand a formal agreement through a handshake. But it's not really just about identifying gestures and where they take place. It's about, so that Pierre Bourdieu uses this word habitus, and you hear a lot of words thrown around to talk about gesture in the body. So like techniques of the body, embodied storytelling is probably the best one I'd use, because it's the idea of taking cultural capital, which is, meaning and value, and physically embodying it within a gesture or a physically learned performance. So then it can be brought into a real space and then interacted with. So something called the collective imagination. So it is taking abstract concepts and letting people exchange them, reinforce them, learn about them, etc., etc. And of course, if you see those gestures in certain institutions, you can infer that these concepts of the body were being used to influence concepts of wider institutions around them. So as I was saying before about, bar, meaning this word to carry, being used to mean tax, well, that tells you that tax was seen as this item that was carried, or and then you could build other conclusions of that. Something that's carried is typically treated more of as a gift rather than as tax, because in the modern day we'd never think of tax as a carried item. It's something that just leaves your bank account when you get paid. Mm-hmm. So it implies a lot about the way they practiced their institutions as well.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. We actually don't have any audience questions, and we have another interview starting very shortly, so I'm going to let you go. But thank you, Jack, so much for coming and talking to us.
A pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Have a good evening.
Thank you, you too.
That was Jack, everybody, talking about Achaemenid bodily practices. I'm going to put the holding screen back up, and we will be back as soon as our next guest joins us. Hello, everybody. We are back with our next HAPS applicant, so let's get going. Thank you so much for joining us.
A moment, sorry.
Don't worry. Hi, could you please tell everyone your name and where you're studying?
Hello, sorry. I couldn't hear you, Megan. Could you repeat?
Yes.
Sorry about
that. No, don't worry at all. I just said hello and asked if you could explain who you are and where you're studying.
Yeah, thank you. So I am Serafina Nicolosi, and I am a PhD candidate at the University of Liverpool in the UK.
Wonderful. And what field are you researching?
I work, so my PhD is in classics and ancient history. And but I especially look at the intersection, at the relations between ancient Greek history and Anatolian culture, which is why I also applied for this funding.
Yeah, fascinating. Thank you. How did you get into that particular area of study?
So I chose the classics and ancient history because I started studying classical studies at high school. And I became really fascinated with ancient Greek language, culture, and history from the very beginning. And in addition to that, I was also interested in history. And also I like analyzing different sources, assessing them against each other, and then drawing my own conclusions. So I thought that classics and ancient history would be the perfect combination, the perfect synthesis for all the things I am mostly passionate about. So that's
perfect. No, that sounds like an ideal match. So what are your very specific research interests then within that field?
Yeah, so my research focuses on Miletus in a time frame that goes from the mid-6th century BC down to the end of the 5th century BC. So Miletus was an ancient Greek city located on the southwestern coast of Asia Minor. So it was a part of a region that was more broadly known as Ionia. And this region also included some other ancient Greek cities, but among those communities, I think that Miletus stood up as the most prominent. I think it was the most admired, and also he held for a very long period of time quite a prominent position, both in economic, political terms, and also in intellectual and cultural terms. So much that an ancient Greek historian, Herodotus, was born in this area and spent part of his life in this area, called it as the ornament of Ionia. So this is just to give you an idea of the position that this city held in the ancient Greek and also non-Greek, I would say, imagination of that time. And within this city, so this is more or less the geographical and also historical context. And within this city, I especially look at personal names. And I try to understand how they may reflect the integration, the cultural integration between the Greek and non-Greek cultural components within the community. And additionally, how these may also help the local elite foster and promote their interactions with the elite of the neighboring empires, such as the Lydian elite, Persian elite, most of all. Yeah.
So what kinds of relationships can you find between the Greek and the non-Greek populations? Were they very much integrated, or would they have been more separated?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Absolutely, yes. They were very, very much integrated. So much that you can see within the same families that both Greek and non-Greek names were used, and they were considered just like Carian. Carian is the definition for the local Anatolian culture. It's called Carian. So you can see that Carian names were considered just as prestigious and relevant, important as Greek names. So they were very much integrated, but still you can also see that some families were more keen than others in maintaining and promoting these links, these cultural links with their native background.
And
so you can see some trends there.
Mm-hmm. This might be a little outside your own particular specialism, so if it's not something you can answer, that's absolutely fine. Do you see a similar melding of material culture?
Yeah, it's a little bit less conspicuous, I would say, than in onomastic traditions, but you can still see it there. And what scholars usually say on this point is that these two cultural components were so well integrated with each other that you cannot really tell the distinction now. You cannot really tell the difference now. Mm-hmm. But still, I mean, there are some, for example, some epigraphies, some very brief inscriptions in the Carian, so the native language, for example. And there are also some ceramic patterns that also show this attachment to the Carian background, and also in the ritual landscape, you can still see that there are some traces of previous practices. But yeah, especially, I would say, especially in the legends, in the foundation legends of the city, you can see that there was this memory of the past, of the native past, was maintained and was also really treasured and sometimes really emphasized by the Malaysian community. So these foundation legends were, of course, have been preserved in Greek, so they are part of the Greek side of Milesian culture. But still, they have been fabricated in such a way that they still preserve some elements. You can see there that Milesians were really interested in preserving the memory of these Carian backgrounds, because there are some, for example, Carian named heroes there. There are these Carian population that plays an important role in the mechanisms surrounding the foundation of the city. So these are the main points where you can especially see traces of the Carian culture. Yeah, I am trying to see. Yeah, this is what I can recall at the moment. I'm sure there is also something else, but yeah.
Well, no, I absolutely put you on the spot there, so don't worry about it. That's very interesting. What are your specific plans for the summer then, and how can HAPS help you?
Well, during the summer, I will be completing an important part of my research, which is concerned with those names constructed with the root Artemis or Artem, which are reflective of this of the relation of how these Milesian names were rooted into naming practices that were also common somewhere else in the Near East, especially in Lydia and Persia. And it will also help me understand how these names were used by these elite Milesians to really present themselves, construct their own image, public image, and construct their identity that they want to use also to maintain their relations with Lydians and Persians.
Wonderful, thank you. So audience, if you have questions for Serafina, please put them in the chat and I will get to them before we say goodbye. Where do you get your data from? What kinds of locations do you find these personal names?
Yeah, there is a very important collection. It's a project that has been going on in Oxford for around 20 years now. So they have built up an important collection. It's called the Lexicon of Greek Personal Names. And there you can find huge gatherings of names coming from different regions, from different regional areas. And yeah, this is my main source of information. And of course, then I also use also some other bibliographical tools, but this is my main point of reference, I would say.
And do you see names being repeated either in the same family through generations, or do you see the same name in different families?
Yeah, that's it's absolutely what happens. I mean, the same name can be repeated throughout generations within the same family, which is an important element that I also consider in my research, because it's a clue. It indicates that specific family was keen on preserving the kind of message that was conveyed, but by that name. Mm-hmm. So you can really see some pattern, you can really see a trend within the same family, but sometimes also across different families. And here I am responding to the second part of your questions, because, different families could be also within the community connected with each other. Because again, also the word genos in ancient Greek means family, but in ancient Greece, it had a broader meaning that it has in modern day societies, because a family was composed by a group of different families that were linked with each other because of their political, religious affiliations, because of their economic interests, and so on and so forth. So it's you can also see the same trend also running through different years and definitely different families as well.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And you were mentioning earlier about names with the element of Artemis in. Was it very common in the region to use theophoric names in personal names as well?
Yeah, theophoric, yeah, I mean, you would not really use the name of the goddess or the god as it was.
Right.
But you would not, for example, be named Artemis yourself, but you could hold a name which contained the element within its linguistic structure. So, for example, in Miletus, we get a lot of Artemon, of people named Artemon, which is, as you can see, it's different from Artemis, and of course it is also because it's a male name, it's not a female name, but you can still see in the root that this specific component related to Artemis is still visible, and yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Serafina. We do not have any audience questions, so I will let you go and get on with your evening. It was lovely talking to you, and I'll be in touch in a couple of weeks.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
And we have our next person ready and waiting. So in the interest of keeping everything to schedule, we are going to get started. So hello, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, Megan. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah.
Would you mind just introducing yourself and telling us where you're studying?
Sure. So my name is Valentina Grasso, and I'm a final year Ph.D. candidate at the University of Cambridge, working on the history of Pre-Islamic Arabia.
Lovely, thank you. How did you get interested in Pre-Islamic Arabia?
Yeah, so I'm Sicilian, so I was always interested in Islamic studies, and especially in the Muslim domination of Sicily, and that led me to a BA in Semitic philology and an MA in Islamic studies. And at some point I was wondering how did Islam originated in the Arabian Peninsula, and I decided to study, to shed light on the history of Islam and on the genesis of Islam, and that led me to my PhD in Cambridge, I guess. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I have to say the genesis of Islam is something I know absolutely nothing about. So if my questions are ridiculous, I apologize in advance. So what then are your own personal research interests during your PhD?
Yeah, so, well, my PhD is on the history of pre-Islamic Arabia, but more precisely is on the late antique period. So I'm working on religious and political developments of pre-Islamic Arabia between 3rd and 7th century. And with pre-Islamic Arabia, I intend, the entire Arabian Peninsula, but also its northern extension into the Syrian desert. I think it's kind of complicated to define this geographical area. So I tend to specify it all the time I talk about pre-Islamic Arabia. I always want to specify what I'm talking about. Yeah,
no, that's very valuable. Mapping ancient geographical boundaries onto modern understandings of geography can be tricky. So I have a lot of sympathy for you there. What are your research plans for the summer then, and how can HAPS help you?
Yes. So first of all, I plan to attend 3 conferences in July, and I will not be funded by Cambridge because I'm in my 4th year of PhD studies. So basically I would need the money for the conferences, both registration and accommodation for 2 of them. And at the same time, I also will expand my PhD research into 2 journal articles. The first one will be on the jinn, which are supernatural creatures found in the Quran. And I will basically trace the jinn and compare them with ancient Near Eastern creatures found in Jewish and pagan literature, and also magic balls, so a lot of interesting stuff. And the other article would be on a Syriac dossier I'm currently translating. It's found in a British library manuscript dated to the 6th century, but contains letters dated between the 5th and 6th century. And some of these letters are relevant to my PhD research because they're about the arrival of Christianity in the region. So it's going to be an article on that. Basically, I will do the conferences and also some writing in the summer.
That sounds like a very busy summer.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
So for your research, what kinds of evidence are you working with? Is it primarily textual, or do you deal with material evidence as well?
I deal with a lot of material evidence, and actually I'm an epigraphist by training. So my BA was actually on descriptions of the Philistines. And then I expanded it and I moved to the Arabian Peninsula, and I worked a lot on the Nabateans inscriptions. Now, for my PhD, I'm working on inscriptions dated between the 3rd and the 7th century and found in the Arabian Peninsula, but also with literary sources written in a wide array of languages, for example, Greek or Syriac, Arabic or Gez. And actually, I'm moving towards Ethiopian studies, I think, every day a little bit more. And in the future, I want to examine the interaction between Arabia and Ethiopia. So a lot of Gez written sources and Arabic sources, of course.
That's fascinating. And who would have written these inscriptions? Are they primarily elites or royalty, or do you have things from different strata of society?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question. So for the south of the Arabian Peninsula, we mostly have monumental inscriptions. So they're written by kings or princes of South Arabia. While in the north, we mostly have graffitis. Most of them are found in the Syrian desert. And they're just names, or maybe a name and a deity, a name and an invocation to a deity. They're very brief in content. And then we have a third corpus, which is constituted by Christian inscriptions, and they're mostly epitaph. So epitaph is basically a tomb, a name, and a tomb in the desert in most of the cases. So we really don't have much evidence for Christianity in the Arabian Peninsula, but we have quite a lot of inscriptions which bear crosses and names. So yeah, it will be basically, I mean, I've been working on this kind of different corpora written by different people, but different communities, but also different social strata. And especially in the South, they are mostly elites. But in the North, we have a more variety of people working on writing these descriptions. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. We have several audience questions, so we will get to those now. Audience, if you have more questions, we do have time to take some, so please don't be shy. What do you think are the most salient features in pre-Islamic cultures that influenced Islam?
That's a great question. So, for example, with the article I'm writing about the jinn, we can. I was trying to find the jinn in pre-Islamic times, and what I've been trying to do with my PhD is basically try to understand if some of the Quranic features are native Arabian pre-Islamic features and not a consequence of the influences from Judaism, Christianity, or also from neighboring superpowers, for example, Rome and Iran. There are some deities that are found in the Quran that are clearly connected with Arabia, and they were venerated. These deities are attested in inscriptions, in temples, and they were surely venerated in the Arabian Peninsula, at least before the rise of Islam. It's a bit more complicated to trace the developments of 6th century Arabia, because at some point we have a decrease in epigraphic habits. So we don't have much inscriptions. We don't have, the temple seems to be closed, or at least not used as much as before. So it's kind of complicated to understand really the period, the decades right before the rise of Islam. But there are clearly some features, for example, these deities, the veneration of these deities that are found in later Muslim tradition and embedded in the Quran that are connected with it. The pre-Islamic pagan past of the region. I'm sure we have limited time. Yeah.
Well, we do, but thank you for that answer. Next up, I understand that the Islamic world overall has an impressive tradition of scholarship. Did the Islamic world have a stance on preserving pre-Islamic culture? Oh, I think we may have lost Valentina. Can you still hear us?
Yeah, that's another great question. So, yeah.
Okay, hopefully we will get Valentina back in a minute, because we still have a couple of minutes before she is done. There we go. Perfect.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Better. I don't know what was. And you disappeared too, so but I was able to hear you. Anyway, yes, so Muslim tradition. All the Muslim sources, can you hear me? Because I cannot see you now. Okay, great.
Yeah, no, we can hear you.
Great. Okay, so all the Muslim tradition sources we have 2 centuries after the rise of Islam. So it's kind of complicated processes. Scholarship in recent years.
Valentina, you're breaking up a lot. Could you turn off your camera and we'll see if that helps the connection?
Okay. Is it better now? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay, great. So basically what I was saying is that we have these Muslim sources people are trying to do in recent years is trying to understand if comparing this material with earlier sources, such as, for example, inscriptions, can be used. I mean, it's useful really to write a coherent historical narrative on the rise of Islam. So yeah, these sources, the Muslim sources are later dated, but for sure they have some values. First of all, because they show how the later and the early Muslim community was imagining and in some ways rebranding their. It's very fascinating the fact, for example, that they always talk and refer to pre-Islamic times as the period of ignorance. So that's the Arabic word is actually jahiliya, which means ignorance. And the people of this period are considered the ignorant people, the people that did not have any knowledge about, of course, religion and Allah. So yeah. I guess they have a very negative. In a way, it's a very negative portrayal, the one we get from the Muslim sources on the rise of Islam. And of course, there is now a considerable amount of Muslim scholarship on the rise of Islam, which is less. In a way, people working today on the rise of Islam, they belong to various continents and various countries, and of course they have less, a less negative portrayal of the rise of Islam is found in modern scholarship than it was in 9th and 10th century Baghdadi scholarship. So, yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And we have one more. Oh, we have one more audience question, and then I will let you go and get on with your afternoon. I've always been confused by the Kaaba in Mecca. Was that pre-Islamic?
Yes. So, we do have in the Muslim sources, we have a considerable amount of information on the Kaaba. And for example, we have the information, one of the portrayals of the Kaaba says that there was inside the Kaaba image of Jesus and Mary. It's kind of complicated to understand the Muslim sources, what is actually reliable and what sources we can trust. If this depiction have any source of historicity that we can trust. But for sure, we do know that there was some sort of pilgrimage going on around the Kaaba already in pre-Islamic times. And we have some, they're usually called, in technical terms, they're called tabiyat. And there are some sort of prayers where, or utterance invoked by pilgrims during this pilgrimage to the Kaaba, and we have them. We have them in pre-Islamic times too. So there was surely something going on. There were surely some people that were venerating, according to Muslim tradition, stones or idols at Kaaba in Islamic times. It's complicated to have a full picture of what was going there, but we don't have really any archaeological expedition going on. We are enough to have an increase in archaeological expedition in Saudi Arabia and in the Peninsula broadly in recent years, but no expedition have been, of course, there is no expedition in Mecca or Medina, just in the surroundings of Mecca and Medina. Again, it's very exciting because the field of pre-Islamic Arabia, it's really like Egypt in the 19th century. It's really a very exciting field to be working on right now. But again, it's kind of complicated to work there, and archaeological research is not that easy. I've been working in Jordan, for example, and in Ethiopia as an archaeologist, but it's kind of more complicated to work in Saudi Arabia, I guess, these days.
Well, Valentina, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and answer our questions. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'll be in touch in a couple of weeks.
Sure. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Okay, we are going to take the briefest of 2-minute breaks. Everybody grab a glass of water. We will be right back. Okay, everyone, we are here with our final guest of the morning. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for this possibility. Thank you.
Of course. Could you please introduce yourself and tell us where you're studying?
Yes. Well, I'm Lucia. I hold an MA in Cultural Anthropology and Ethnolinguistics, and I'm currently in the first year of Ph.D. In Archaeology at the University of Glasgow. Well.
That's great. Thank you. How did you get into archaeology as a field?
Yeah, actually, this comes, my research interest, especially in archaeology, comes from my 2 years experience in Saudi Arabia. And then when I came back, I'm currently living in Italy. So when I came back, I actually discovered how effectively the sensory anthropology that I studied, there was also a sensory archaeology behind Saudi Arabia culture. And I would love to integrate the two concerning and apply it to the intangible cultural heritage of Bahur. Bahur is translated as incense, but effectively is a mix of spices and aromatics, and it's incense, of course, and has this long-standing tradition and culture that comes from Nabateans, the Queen of Saba. So it's an ancient culture that has been brought up until today, and it's very strong among the population. And so I would love to study about it, to research much more about it, because there's a complete world behind it. And as we know, Saudi Arabia is effectively now opening to tourism and to heritage and to archaeology field, for example, and so on. So actually, my main concern is to be able to integrate what academics can offer with local knowledge. So it's an integration, it's what is called exchanging knowledge, right, between academics and locals, to be able to have ethical tourism also, not only, tourism, let's say, empty of significance. Mm-hmm. So that's, yeah.
That sounds absolutely fascinating, and I have to say, a huge fan of any project that tries to involve local communities in academic work. So, congratulations. What kinds of evidence then would you be working with?
Right. So, well, actually, it's incense burners, of course, because there are some examples of incense burners from that ancient time. And not only actually in Arabia. I just discovered that there is also at the British Museum, for example, some example of these incense burners. And of course, in the Museum of Riyadh and the Museum of Al-Hassa that I visited. And I think it's very important to be able to connect, let's say, the materiality, so the material effectively findings with the knowledge of the locals. And then, of course, as we know that there were two important incense routes that were going from Arabia Felix, so from now Yemen, up to all Arabia, up to Gaza and the Mediterranean world, and then up to Europe. And so that's also the incense route, especially I'm focusing on the eastern coast. Incense route is something that can be connected to people, because people are very affectionate to the desert. Although they live in the city, they live contemporary, right, lives, of course, but they are still very connected to the land. So we are talking also about landscape archaeology. And effectively, the findings will be also about landscape, the real landscape of where this incense route was.
Fantastic. And how do you know then what people were burning in antiquity and what they were using as incense?
Right. Well, actually, there is, of course, there is very ancient literature, let's say, also, for example, for Pliny the Older, that was talking about that incense was effectively like gold. was so, they made also the population very rich, the population that Nabateans, for example, right? We know Petra, but also in Saudi Arabia, there is, let's say, a Saudi Petra, Madain Saleh. Effectively, so incense effectively was the main source of this activity. And then this ancient literature also talks about amber, or musk, or some other effectively aromatics that were coming both from Arabia but also from India and from other sources, and they were brought into Arabia to be then sold, transport first, and then sold all over the known world. And that effectively incense, what they call incense, so the name, the botanical name that they put inside this ancient literature is actually the same that we know also today.
That's fascinating. Thank you. What are your summer plans then, and how can HAPS help?
Yes, actually, I have three big plans, let's say, for the summer, as it is my first year. So first thing is I would love to see, as I just discovered that there are also some incense burners at the British Museum. So I would love, oh, bless you.
Thank you.
And I would love to find out if there are, so the information that there is at the British Museum about these incense burners that effectively come from the same period that I'm studying. And then, of course, from there, I would love to go to Glasgow. So finally, I would be able to do field work with my supervisors. And so this will give me then the possibility to learn the field work because, of course, the next year, it will be a field work in Saudi Arabia.
Mm-hmm.
And then my third plan is, of course, I know how to read and write Arabic. And I know a basic conversation of Arabic. But I think that if I want to communicate with locals, for me, as an ethno-linguistic, and it's very important to know at least an intermediate conversation of Arabic. So effectively, I would love also to do a summer course of just a conversation in Arabic. Mm-hmm. So that's three big plans, let's say. For the
three
summer.
Big, very, very worthwhile plans. Wonderful. So, assuming that everything goes ahead and that you are ultimately able to get to Saudi Arabia and identify a community to work with, have you had any thoughts about whereabouts in the region you'd like to go, or have you identified a site to work with specifically?
Yes, specifically Eastern Saudi Arabia, so Al-Khubar, Dammam, Darang, Al-Hassa. I'm just naming some names because of people that actually already know there. So I already have some friends and some connections there mm-hmm. that they help me to understand this culture. And for me, for example, these 2 years that I was there, they were very important to connect with these people. And they taught me so much, and that's how I discovered their culture and the significance behind it. So, of course, I will focus mostly on the Eastern coast because of these connections already, let's say.
Mm-hmm. So. Thank you. We do have a couple of audience questions already. Was incense used only in temples or by elites or commoners?
Right. Well, actually, we think about incense. When we think about it, we think, of course, some religious practice, right? Because it's still used, like in Christianity, mm-hmm. right? And but effectively, it was used not only by rich people and not only for religion or spiritual rituals. It was it's, of course, I still have to study the ancient time mostly, but today for sure it's not used for religious purpose. It's used for well-being. So for festivity, for conviviality, okay? So it's offered together with kahwa, coffee, and dates, and it's offered together to the hosts also. But also it's used like in every day because you smell this scent also on the road when you walk because they use it a lot. So it's everyday life basically also, and heritage leaves.
That's fascinating. So when you're looking at the use of something like incense and this kind of sensory experience in the ancient world, how can you understand that kind of experiential like data, or I don't really know what I'm asking.
Yeah, no, I completely understand, because actually it's the same question that actually some professor asked me, because it's, sensory archaeology, also sensory anthropology actually are very new, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And if we think that we live life through experiences, right? And how do we make experience? We make experience with our senses. And among, let's say, the Aristotelian 5 senses, we know that olfaction is the one that goes directly to the brain cortex, so to the memory. And so there's no bias, no filters, that it goes directly to our memory. And then that means that also the Bahur tradition that is today is connected effectively with a culture that if you ask, like, also young women, for example, mostly Bahur makers are women, that they do it for sustain their economy, okay? And so they are not rich, okay, rich people. And if you ask them, they will tell you, my grandmother taught me, my aunt taught me. So it's a memory that comes from family, and so family members to family members. And these are experiences, and they experience this kind of tradition through this sensory experience. So this sensory approach to this heritage, but they are not aware that it's a heritage, effectively.
Lovely, thank you. So another question, and on the understanding that you're very early in your PhD process and you may not be able to answer this yet, I imagine incense was very important, especially if you live next to a tannery or in a city with open sewers. Does incense use trail off as public sanitation improves?
Oh, does incense use trail off as a public sanitation? Oh, that's so to improve sanitation, I understood, like, from this question?
So I think the question is saying, as city life became less smelly, you didn't smell so much manure, and do you have a decrease in incense?
That's a very interesting question, actually. Thank you. It's not, incense is not used as covering bad smell, okay? Although actually in Christianity was used for this, especially when there was not the same funeral, techniques that are today. So effectively incense was used for that. But there, and today especially, is used as a status. Is a status of all Middle East, effectively. So it's not only Saudi, it's Oman, it's Emirates, it's not only Saudi Arabia, okay? But it's a status. It's like kahwa, it's like the Arabic coffee, it's like dates, okay? It's something that is cultural. So it's not for sanification, no, today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We actually don't have any more audience questions, so I will let you go and enjoy the rest of your evening. But this was wonderful to hear about. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Okay, as ever, a fantastic collection of interviews, fantastic collection of research. I am currently putting together the voting documentation. So if you have donated to HAPS, you will receive an email from me probably Monday or Tuesday of this week with information about how to vote for your 4 most interesting projects. So please do keep your eye out for that. If you don't receive an email and you think you should, send me an email, digitalhammurabi@gmail.com or hapsfund@gmail.com. I monitor both accounts. And if you have not donated to HAPS and you think maybe you'd like to, I fully support that feeling. You can do so at hapsfunds.com/donate. Everybody who donates to HAPS, and remember, HAPS is a federally recognized nonprofit, everybody who donates to our funding does get to vote for who receives our summer scholarships. So if you watched these interviews, if you have very strong feelings about who you think should be funded, please do donate. Even a donation of $1 will get you a vote, and you get the same amount of votes regardless of how much you donate. So please do. It's a very worthwhile cause. It's obviously very important to me personally, but very important to a lot of PhD students, because this work is not cheap, and frankly, they don't get enough funding as it is. So we're doing our best to help bridge that financial gap for everybody. I will be back in a couple of hours. Let's see. We start up again at 2:20 p.m. EDT. I will be back. I will be monitoring the chat and taking care of technical things. And the lovely Melina Seabrook, archaeologist from Harvard, will be conducting the interviews. So I hope to see you all then.